To become Roman emperor was to claim absolute power over the known world. Yet for many who wore the purple, the throne became a death sentence. Brothers murdered brothers in their mother's arms. Emperors were strangled in bathhouses by their own wrestling partners. Some were buried alive in their own tombs. What follows are 7 imperial deaths that reveal the brutal reality behind Rome's grandeur, where trust was fatal, family was dangerous, and power guaranteed nothing except a violent end. Murdered in his mother's arms, December 211 CE, the Imperial Palace, Rome. The Roman Empire was ruled by 2 brothers who despised each other. Caracalla and Geta, sons of Emperor Septimius Severus, had inherited joint rule upon their father's death. But they could not share power peacefully. They divided the imperial palace with separate guards. They refused to eat together. Each suspected the other of plotting assassination. Their mother, Julia Domna, desperately tried to maintain peace between her sons, but the hatred ran too deep. On a winter evening, Geta received an urgent summons. His mother requested his presence in her private apartments for a reconciliation meeting with Caracalla. Trusting his mother's protection, Geta arrived unarmed. What he didn't know was that centurions loyal to Caracalla were already positioned inside, hidden and waiting. As Geta entered the room, the doors locked behind him. His brother greeted him with a cold stare. The meeting was a trap. On Caracalla's signal, centurions burst from their hiding places and drew their swords. Geta ran to his mother, throwing himself into her arms for protection. Julia screamed and tried to shield him with her own body. It made no difference. Blood splattered across her dress as the centurion stabbed Geta repeatedly. He died in his mother's embrace, his blood soaking her clothes as she wailed in horror. But Caracalla wasn't satisfied with merely killing his brother. He launched a ruthless campaign to erase Geta from history itself. What modern historians call damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Anyone connected to Geta, friends, servants, supporters, was executed without trial. Historical records indicate over 20,000 people were killed in the purge. Geta's face was chiseled off statues. His name was erased from inscriptions. Possessing his image became treason, punishable by death. The ultimate cruelty came when Caracalla forbade his mother from mourning publicly. Julia was forced to smile and celebrate while her son's memory was systematically destroyed. The assassination in a mother's chambers, meant to be a sanctuary, made Geta's death not just violent, but a profound betrayal of the most fundamental human bonds. If you value this kind of detailed historical analysis that examines the brutal realities of ancient power, please consider liking this video. The disease that consumed him alive, early 300 CE, Serdica, modern-day Sofia, Bulgaria. Roman Emperor Galerius was at the height of his power. A military commander who had risen through the ranks, he had ruled the eastern provinces with an iron fist for nearly 2 decades. Known for his brutal persecution of Christians, Galerius was feared rather than loved. His muscular frame and battle-hardened demeanor intimidated those around him. But even the most powerful men cannot escape disease. What began as a small abscess in his genital region quickly developed into something far more sinister. Court physicians applied standard treatments, poultices, herbal remedies, primitive surgical drainage. Nothing helped. The abscess grew larger, spreading across his groin. Within weeks, it had ulcerated, creating an open wound that refused to heal. The deterioration was relentless. The ulceration penetrated deeper into his body, eventually creating a pathway directly into his intestines. Contemporary accounts describe worms breeding in his putrefying flesh, likely maggots that infested the necrotic tissue. As the infection spread, the stench became unbearable. Courtiers gagged when entering his chambers. Perfumes and incense burned constantly, but could not mask the smell of rotting flesh. Galerius was fully conscious through this process, experiencing excruciating pain that no opium or wine could fully dull. As his condition worsened, he grew desperate. Physicians who failed to cure him were executed. Some accounts suggest several doctors were beheaded for their inability to stop the disease's progression. One chronicler noted the emperor's screams could be heard throughout the palace complex. In his final days, Galerius, perhaps seeing divine punishment for his persecution of Christians, issued an edict of toleration, effectively ending the great persecution. His body, now largely consumed by gangrene, finally surrendered. Attendants reported that in his final moments, the emperor, who had ordered countless executions, begged for a mercy killing that never came. He died slowly, aware, in agony that lasted for months. Modern medical analysis suggests Galerius suffered from Fournier's gangrene, a rapidly spreading necrotizing infection of the genital and perineal regions. Without antibiotics or modern surgical intervention, it was invariably fatal and invariably agonizing. Dragged through the streets, December 20th, 69 CE. Rome. The streets of Rome became the stage for one of the most humiliating imperial deaths in history. Vitellius had been emperor for only 8 months during the chaotic year of the Four Emperors, a man known more for gluttony than leadership. As the forces of his rival Vespasian entered Rome, Vitellius knew his reign was ending. The fighting in the city was fierce. Desperate to escape, Vitellius disguised himself in dirty clothes and hid in the palace janitor's quarters. He barricaded the door with a mattress and kept a dog for protection. This final hiding place was a pathetic contrast to the imperial quarters he had recently occupied. When Vespasian's soldiers discovered him, Vitellius begged for his life, claiming he possessed vital state secrets. His pleas were ignored. The soldiers bound his hands behind his back and threw a noose around his neck. They placed a sword point under his chin, forcing him to keep his head up so everyone could see his face. Then they dragged him from the palace. The man who had ruled the known world was paraded half-naked through the forum like a common criminal. The citizens of Rome, who had suffered through civil war and food shortages under his brief reign, showed no mercy. They pelted him with rotten food and human excrement. Some spat in his face, while others shouted obscenities. Every few steps, someone would pull his hair or prick him with a blade. This was not a quick execution, but slow, deliberate humiliation. At the Gemonian Stairs, the traditional site of punishment for traitors, Vitellius was subjected to a long series of small cuts before being finished off. His body was then mutilated, hooked onto a pole, and dragged to the Tiber River, where it was unceremoniously thrown in. This denied him proper burial and, by Roman belief, any peace in the afterlife. His corpse would sink into the mud of the Tiber, unmourned and unremembered, except as a cautionary tale of failed ambition. The Poisoned Emperor, October 13th, 54 CE. The Imperial Palace, Rome. Emperor Claudius sat down to a lavish dinner. Unaware he was consuming his last meal. The 63-year-old ruler had a reputation for physical infirmity but sharp intellect. He had recently hinted at changing his succession plans to favor his biological son, Britannicus, over his stepson, Nero. His wife, Agrippina the Younger, could not allow this to happen. The dinner featured one of Claudius's favorite delicacies, mushrooms. Unknown to the emperor, Agrippina had enlisted Locusta, Rome's most notorious poisoner. The mushrooms served to Claudius had been carefully laced with a toxic substance. He consumed them eagerly, unaware of the betrayal by his own wife. Within hours, the first symptoms appeared. According to the historian Tacitus, Claudius experienced severe stomach pains and vomiting. The initial poisoning, however, wasn't entirely successful. Claudius's body began expelling the toxin naturally. By the next morning, he appeared to be recovering, much to Agrippina's alarm. She couldn't allow him to survive and expose her plot. Acting quickly, she summoned the emperor's personal physician, Xenophon, who was secretly loyal to her cause. What happened next has been debated by historians for centuries. The most accepted account claims Xenophon inserted a poisoned feather into the emperor's throat, ostensibly to help induce vomiting. Some sources suggest he might have used a poisoned enema instead. Either way, the result was the same. The second dose of poison was delivered directly into Claudius's system, bypassing his body's natural defenses. These imperial deaths reveal how dangerous family relationships were at the highest levels of Roman power. Which of these deaths do you find most shocking? And what does it reveal about Roman political culture? Share your thoughts in the comments. The emperor began convulsing. His breathing became labored. He could no longer speak. As imperial attendants watched helplessly, Claudius's extremities grew cold. His eyes bulged as the poison attacked his nervous system. He died slowly, his body paralyzed, but his mind likely aware until the final moment. Agrippina delayed announcing his death until preparations for Nero's succession were complete. Within hours, her 16-year-old son was proclaimed emperor. Claudius's biological son, Britannicus, would be dead within 5 years, also poisoned. The mushroom would become forever associated with this assassination. The Roman writer Seneca later mockingly referred to mushrooms as the food of the gods, because they had made Claudius a god by killing him. Strangled in the bath, December 31st, 192 CE. Rome. The final day of the Roman year became the final day of an emperor's life. Commodus, the 31-year-old ruler who styled himself as the reincarnation of Hercules, had spent years alienating Rome's political elite. Son of the respected emperor Marcus Aurelius, Commodus had squandered his inheritance through increasingly erratic behavior, fighting as a gladiator in the arena, demanding worship as a living god, and executing senators on whims. Behind the scenes, a conspiracy was forming among those closest to him. That evening, Commodus prepared for his usual ritual bath. His mistress Marcia had already made the first attempt on his life earlier that day, poisoning his wine, but Commodus had vomited it up. Suspicious, but not yet certain of betrayal, he retired to his bath, still weakened from the poison. The conspirators, Marcia, his chamberlain Eclectus, and the Praetorian prefect Latus, knew they had to act quickly. They sent for Narcissus, the emperor's wrestling partner, a muscular athlete who had earned Commodus's trust through countless training sessions. The emperor was alone in the bathhouse, steam rising from the heated water, when Narcissus entered. Perhaps Commodus thought his training partner had come to help him recover from his earlier illness. Instead, Narcissus approached from behind, while the emperor was vulnerable in the water. With powerful hands that had won countless wrestling matches, Narcissus grasped Commodus around the throat. The emperor struggled, but the poison had weakened him, and the slippery marble gave him no leverage. Water splashed violently as Commodus fought for his life. His lungs burned for air as Narcissus maintained his grip, squeezing tighter. The struggle lasted several minutes. Commodus clawed at his attacker's arms. His face turned purple. Veins bulged at his temples. Eventually, his movements grew weaker. His eyes, once fierce with the delusion of godhood, bulged in terror. His body went limp in the bath, the water now still around his lifeless form. The assassination triggered a political crisis known as the Year of the Five Emperors. Commodus, who had believed himself invincible and divine, died naked and helpless, strangled by a man he had trusted completely. The mob's 3 days of vengeance. September 12, 1185, Constantinople. The streets of the Byzantine capital witnessed a death so brutal that it shocked even the most hardened citizens. Andronikos Komnenos, a 65-year-old emperor known for exceptional cruelty, had finally pushed his subjects too far. His reign of terror had included mass executions, torture of opponents, and forcing relatives of his victims to dine amid the severed heads of their loved ones. When the city revolted, Andronikos attempted to flee by sea with his teenage wife. They were captured at the harbor. The fallen emperor was bound in heavy chains and presented to his successor, Isaac Angelos. But the new emperor didn't order a quick execution. Instead, he handed Andronikos over to the mob, to the families of his many victims who had waited for this moment. What followed was not justice, but vengeance in its rawest form. The crowd stripped Andronikos naked and tied him to a post in the marketplace. For 3 days, the torture continued without pause. Citizens took turns inflicting whatever suffering they could imagine. First, they beat him with clubs until his skin turned purple and swelled. Then they began systematic mutilation. Someone cut off his right hand with a rusty blade. Others pulled out his teeth and hair one by one, slowly and deliberately. An eyewitness recorded that the crowd gouged out his left eye and poured boiling water over his face, melting the skin away from the bone. Throughout this ordeal, Andronikos remained conscious. He reportedly repeated only, "Lord, have mercy." As each new torture began, his body, once regal, became unrecognizable. On the 3rd day, what remained of the emperor was dragged to the Hippodrome, the city's massive arena. There he was, hung upside down between 2 pillars, still breathing, still aware. Soldiers from the city garrison then took turns stabbing spears into his body, carefully avoiding vital organs to prolong his suffering. Death finally came when 2 Latin soldiers drove swords simultaneously into his torso from opposite sides. His body was left hanging for days afterward as a warning to future tyrants. The prolonged public torture of Andronikos represents one of the most extreme examples of popular vengeance in medieval history. The very cruelty he had inflicted on others was returned to him 100-fold by those he had terrorized. Buried alive and driven to cannibalism. April 491 CE, Constantinople. Byzantine Emperor Zeno fell suddenly ill with severe dysentery. The 66-year-old ruler had made powerful enemies during his reign, particularly his wife Ariadne and the imperial chamberlain Urbicius. Originally from Isauria, a rugged region in modern-day Turkey, Zeno was considered a barbarian by Constantinople's elite. They had tolerated him, but never truly accepted him as their emperor. His illness presented an opportunity they had been waiting for. As Zeno's condition worsened, he fell into unconsciousness. The imperial physicians declared him dead. A funeral was hastily arranged. But what happened next was no proper burial. According to multiple Byzantine chroniclers, Zeno was still breathing when he was placed inside his sarcophagus in the imperial mausoleum. The heavy stone lid was sealed above him. No embalming was performed. No funeral rites were completed. the unconscious emperor was simply locked away in darkness. Hours later, Zeno awoke inside his own tomb. The pitch darkness was absolute. The air was already growing stale. At first, he might have thought he was experiencing a nightmare. Then, the horrifying reality set in. He was entombed alive. According to the chronicler John of Nikiu, guards stationed outside heard his desperate cries for help, echoing from within the sealed sarcophagus. "I am still alive! Have mercy! Release me!" The guards reported this to Empress Ariadne. Her response was chilling. "We have no red slippers for him anymore." The imperial footwear would not be provided. The emperor would not be released. Zeno's cries continued for days, growing weaker as the oxygen depleted and hunger set in. In the complete darkness, driven by starvation and desperation, the unthinkable happened. When the tomb was opened years later during renovations to the imperial mausoleum, workers made a grisly discovery. The emperor's body showed signs that in his final days of madness and starvation, he had gnawed at the flesh of his own arms. His corpse was found in a contorted position, evidence of his desperate struggle in the confined space. His imperial purple shroud was torn to shreds. His arms bore the unmistakable marks of human teeth. Zeno, who had ruled an empire, died in the dark, buried alive by his own wife, reduced to such desperation that he consumed his own flesh. The illusion of imperial power. To be Roman emperor was to command legions, control vast wealth, and exercise power of life and death over millions. Yet these 7 deaths reveal a darker truth about the imperial purple. It was soaked in blood, betrayal, and paranoia. Geta was murdered by his own brother in their mother's arms. Galerius rotted alive from disease, screaming for mercy that never came. Vitellius was dragged naked through the streets by a mob. Claudius was poisoned by his wife at dinner. Commodus was strangled by his wrestling partner in the bath. Andronicus was tortured for 3 days by citizens seeking revenge. Zeno was buried alive and driven to cannibalism in his own tomb. What unites these deaths is vulnerability. Despite their absolute power, these emperors were betrayed by family, advisors, physicians, bodyguards, the very people who should have protected them. The imperial court was not a sanctuary, but a den of conspiracy where trust was fatal and paranoia was justified. Many emperors died violently. Of the first 54 Roman emperors, only a handful died of natural causes or peacefully in their beds. The majority were assassinated, forced to commit suicide, or killed in civil war. The imperial purple promised absolute power, but it delivered only constant danger, endless paranoia, and, for most who wore it, a violent death that no amount of authority could prevent. If this examination of imperial power and vulnerability intrigued you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more historical documentaries that reveal the brutal realities behind ancient grandeur. Thank you for watching.